morning, it's May 11th, 2006, and we are conducting this interview at Pontiac Township High School. Today we will be interviewing Roger Wahls, born August 8, 1945. The people who are conducting this interview are myself, Sarah Amadon, Sam Shop, Larissa Zorden, and Taylor Brinkman. Mr. Wahls served from August 1969 to August 1990 as a major in the Marine Corps. Alright, Mr. Wahls, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted. Actually, it's a combination. I knew that I would be drafted, and I did receive my draft notice, but I contacted the local draft board and I asked them if I had any choice about what service or what length of time in the service, and they said they had no problem with that as long as I had a contract before I was to report to the train station, and I did. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Gary Griffin, Jacob Montgomery, please report to the office.
I'll just edit that out.
Okay. Why did you choose the Marines as an branch?
I think it was because of the people that I had known through college at Illinois State. We had a lot of servicemen that fulfilled an enlistment contract, came back to ISU, primarily Teachers College, and I had service members in class with me and got to know them, and I was just impressed by the maturity and the attitude of those who had been Marines. And I thought as long as I have to serve my country in the military, then that's that type of organization I want to be with.
So where were you living, on campus at the time?
Yes, in the dormitories.
Do you remember your first days in service? What they were like?
I sure do. Yep. That was, to me, a pleasant and challenging experience, and it was. I'd love to go through that again for a while. It was very interesting, very challenging, and I enjoyed it.
Do you remember anything specific about boot camp or training?
That it was both mentally and physically challenging, and it pushed you, especially physically, past limits that you thought that you could endure. For running, doing all types of physical events, stress from purposeful sleep deprivation, just so that you could prove to yourself that you could function and work during those times, because those were things that you may have to face in combat, and that was very, very challenging.
How did you get through it?
Number one, I had a goal. I wanted to complete it, and number two, I wanted to do the best I could. So it wasn't, although it was a challenge, it wasn't impossible.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
Surely, some of them who were our platoon leaders and our sergeant instructors, I remember, because you're spending a few months with them, and they're giving you most of the instruction, and so you get to know them well.
Wait a second. The next question.
I think that I remember, the ones that I remember particularly are the ones that were most professional, and that in anything, just like in school, you have teachers that stand out, and you'll always remember, and you will always respect them, and you also have upperclassmen that we all kind of pick as mentors. Hey, when I get to be a senior, I want to be like that. I want to have that maturity, or that if you're an athlete, I want to be able to have that ability. You do the same thing in any profession. You're looking for mentors, and you're admiring the people who stand out because of their professionalism.
Okay. Which wars did you serve in?
Well, one called the Cold War. Nobody really talks about or thinks about it, but it really was a challenge and a standoff for the NATO countries, including the United States, and the Soviet countries. Otherwise, I served through the Vietnam era, and I just missed the Gulf War.
Where exactly were you stationed throughout the years?
Most of the time in the continental United States, primarily Camp Pendleton, California, with the 1st Marine Division or Infantry Training School or our logistics support group on Camp Pendleton. Otherwise, I spent 3 years in Hawaii, a couple of tours in the Far East, Okinawa, Japan. I started out at Quantico, Virginia, at the Marine Corps Educational and Training Facility there. I spent a short time at Naval Flight Training in Pensacola, Florida. I started out as an aviator, had to be a fighter pilot, but got a pair of glasses instead and became an infantry officer. But during that time we did do some operations in Amchitka, Alaska, which is in the Aleutian Chain, and Somalia, Africa.
Okay. Do you remember, for your job assignments, what did those imply for you to do?
The majority of my time on active duty was spent as an infantry officer and a infantry commander, and some time was spent as a logistics officer. Logistics is the coordination of all the fuel, food, ammunition, vehicles, all the supplies and arrangements for supporting action. And many times too, we did spend time in school. So those were an overview of what my assignments were. Of course, there's a lot of things that go into the day-to-day assignments and responsibilities as you progress up the chain in rank and responsibility.
Did you see combat?
Not combat traditionally like you would think in Vietnam or in Iraq, but skirmishes such as operations in the Aleutian Chain on Amchitka and in Somalia, Africa, were the extent of it.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Yes, I was. Not anything extraordinary. A Navy Achievement Medal for professional service, and at the end of my career was given a Meritorious Service Medal for professional service.
Did you stay in touch with anybody back at home?
Pretty much the way any young person does. Not near as much as their parents would like, but sure did. Wrote to my parents, called them when that occasion permitted. We didn't have cell phones like we have now, nor the internet, nor websites, and so sometimes communication was difficult, and it could be pretty interesting. And on the island of Okinawa and on
Is that a drill or something?
I've never heard that bell for a drill before. It's not fire because fire thing isn't going off. It's not tornado. It's a series of bells.
yeah, that doesn't sound like a
Please disregard that bell.
Openly.
somebody backed into it and sat on the switch.
Sorry.
Something that you'll probably never encounter that was interesting, in remote bases and stations, and this certainly, I experienced in the Marine Corps, and I'm sure in the Air Force and the Army at remote locations, the same thing. We had what was called Mars Radio. It stands for Marine Affiliate Radio Station. And It was really operated and coordinated by the amateur radio operators, the ham radio operators throughout the world. For instance, on our camp in Okinawa, we had a Mars station. And the Mars station was really not as large even as this room. A big antenna and ham radio equipment, and we would make appointments, and we could go to the Mars station. The Mars operator would, with ham radio, call a ham radio operator in the States. And that ham radio operator in the States, whichever one answered, would call, for instance, our parents' home phone number. And they would make that connection. And then the Marine would be in the Mars station in Okinawa. And once that connection was made, then we could talk to our parents over ham radio. And we all got 3 minutes, but the operators always gave us 5 or 7. And one unique thing about it, the ham radio operators, because we were using a combination of telephone and radio waves, would have to switch and make the electrons go one way or receive the electrons. So after every sentence you'd have to say over, which enabled the radio operator to switch the circuit so that now the other person could talk. So you'd be talking to your mom and saying, I really miss you, have a happy Mother's Day, over. And then they'd have to do the same thing. It's a little bit tough for civilians to get used to saying over after their communications. But, and the voices would be interrupted, or they'd sound like they were coming from 100 miles away. But it was really interesting, and those phone calls really meant a lot. We were supposed to get bills, for instance, my parents. We were supposed to get bills for the long-distance telephone call from the ham operator here in the States. I don't think anyone ever got a bill. And I've never been a ham radio operator. We have some here in town, but they really did perform, and do perform, a great service. And we did the same thing aboard ship. In the bow of ships, if we were at sea, there was usually a ham radio station, and we'd do the same thing from ship at sea. Other than that, you would have to wait until you got to a country or a facility which had traditional telephones and make a long-distance overseas telephone call, which could be very expensive. Otherwise, we rode.
I understand when you were in California that you met somebody there that affected the rest of your life.
Right. I was probably 27, and I'd just come back from overseas to Camp Pendleton, California, to the infantry training school to be a platoon leader there. And Pat Steele, who was a new lieutenant, had just graduated, female, Pat, had just graduated from the Marine Corps Basic School and had been assigned to the infantry training school as a dispersing officer, the pay officer. And we met there, and we started, Marine Corps is big on physical fitness. Every noon we have an hour and a half for lunch, and an hour and a half is supposed to be devoted to physical fitness. So we were running together and working out together, and got to be friends. And she eventually became my wife, and she spent about 5.5 years on active duty. But yes, it certainly did change my life.
I like that. Do you remember when your service ended?
Yes, that was in 1990, and I had 21 years of active duty, and was probably going to be assigned either back to Okinawa, the 3rd Marine Division, for a 3rd unaccompanied tour without my family, or Headquarters Marine Corps in Washington. And we had a 5-year-old son, and just did not want to be separated from my family again, and did not want to rear him in Washington, D.C. So I thought now was the time to begin a new career, and so I resigned in the summer of 1990, and then about a year later we relocated back here to Pontiac, to Illinois.
Did you go back to work or?
Actually, shortly after I resigned and was retired, incidentally, a service member is never fully retired until after their 30th anniversary. Many of us they retire between the 20th year and the 30th year, but from that 20th year to 30, you're really, even though it's referred to as retirement, it's really called retainer, and you're subject to recall at the pleasures of the service or the government. So after I had initially retired, shortly after that, Desert Shield happened, which was the first Gulf War. No one knew that was going to happen. That was a real blindsiding event. And so, obviously, I called headquarters Marine Corps and asked them, what now? You know, what should we? Are you going to recall me? Should I come back in? What's going to happen? And I'm available. But they said, no, just remain where you are. We don't know where this war is heading, or if it's going to be a war even. And it would probably be best not to be involved in moving your family, and in the middle of that, be recalled back to active duty. So I remained. We owned a home in San Clemente, California, and we remained there. And so I interviewed for a new profession, and I was interviewing with companies from San Diego to Los Angeles, and being used to being in the field and being a very active person, I really did not enjoy, the commute, having to drive to the San Diego area, or commuting in Los Angeles traffic, and I was not sure I wanted to remain in Southern California. And so during that time, I did have some friends from our church who worked with Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance, a regional office in Newport Beach, and they invited me to, once you check us out, it's a professional organization, and you might find that you like it very well. So I did, and that seemed to work, and it was very interesting. During the Marine Corps, I had gone back to school and got my MBA, and so I had a lot of financial education, some background, especially working with marine logistics, and that seemed to work very well. And so I was with the Mass Mutual office in Newport Beach for about a year, and then relocated back here to Pontiac. We have had a Mass Mutual district office in Bloomington and a regional office in Peoria, and I really wanted to get re-involved with farming, and so I joined my brother and his farming operation of our family farm, and so we've been partnering in that, and I've also been working in financial services and insurance too.
Okay. Besides, obviously you still have a relationship with your wife, but anybody else from the service that you still talk to or are friends with now?
Most of them have retired, and so you kind of lose contact. But I get the Marine Times every week, and so that's our Marine magazine. And so I look through assignments and retirements, and just to try to keep track of people that I became close to that may have remained in, but still most have retired. And my close friends that I did develop, for instance, we'll correspond with Christmas cards, etc. And if we journey to Washington, D.C. or California, I will stop in and see them.
Did your military experiences influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Well, I think it certainly did. A lot of people don't think about this. I think like the mission of the Marine Corps is to go out and defeat the enemy. the real mission of the Marine Corps or any service is to be so well trained and professional that an aggressor is going to think twice about messing with us. So the military doesn't crave war. It craves to be professional and well trained so that you don't have to go to war, or if it's needed to be used, it's quick and clean and efficient. I was really impressed with the professionalism that we have in our armed forces. It's an all-voluntary force, and even though occasionally you read about some services having difficulty in fulfilling recruiting requirements, the Marine Corps never has, even now, and not since World War II has the Marine Corps ever had a problem assessing recruits. And as an officer, you get to work with some very highly educated, highly professional, highly motivated people, and you get to learn a lot about the world, a lot about how politics in the world works, and how it affects what countries attempt to do and how they go about exerting their political influence, and what steps that can be taken diplomatically, hopefully, that can end conflict and suppress it before having to engage in combat to do it.
Did you bring any photographs, or do you have any closing remarks?
No.
Anything else you'd like to add to the interview?
I think that it's really important that you all are doing what you're doing, and that's capturing some of the history and experiences that former service members have had, because if you don't do it and compile that, catalog it, a lot of those experiences in history will be lost, and I think it's good to at least have that resource to go back and look at when needed or wanted, as what was life like then, what caused people to have the feelings that they did under those conditions in the world at that time, and what perhaps we can learn, maybe what not do or what to do for the future. And a lot of people in this community have contributed greatly to our efforts to preserve freedom throughout the years. We have some heroes living in this community that are modest, and but when you look at what they did, particularly during World War II, the things that they overcame, for instance, like John Rodino would be one of them, we really have an appreciation for what we're able to have because people before us sacrificed and made sure that our freedom was preserved and our democracy and our way of life.